So we're at 1 o'clock. I think we'll hang on to get started for a few more minutes to let some more people trickle in. We do have, I believe, a virtual poll that we can get started to identify kind of what your background is, CPUC staff, other state agencies, advocacy organizations, and so on. So please fill out the poll when you are able, and we'll get started in a minute.
Jeff and Steve, I am going to be eating a little lunch, so I'm going to go off camera for a little bit, but I am here, I promise.
So it's a few minutes after 1. We've got, I think, a couple of people still trickling in, but we've got a pretty good crowd. So we can get started, I think, by starting to talk about the goal of the session. Again, thanks everyone for joining. This is the water breakout session for the Environmental and Social Justice Plan workshop. We have a virtual poll going to kind of get a count of what folks' backgrounds are, so please fill that out. But getting started, just talking about why we're all here in this breakout session is to get some potential new action items for the ESJ action plan update specifically related to water. As you have probably heard over the past couple of days, the ESJ action plan outlines steps that the CPUC intends to take to further principles of environmental and social justice. It is centered on 9 goals primarily, like incorporating equity into decision-making, increasing access to programs and services, promoting workforce development opportunities, and ways to participate in CPUC processes. So again, that's kind of the backdrop of what we're talking about here. And a few just kind of general comments before we start. We are hoping to make this breakout session as much of an interactive discussion as possible. So there are a few ways you can participate. To give a verbal comment or ask a question, open the participants list in the bottom right of this window. And click the hand next to your name. That will kind of raise your hand and let the event host know that you're wanting to speak. Someone will call on you and then unmute you when it's your turn to say your comments. Please keep in mind that we might not get to everyone, but we will do our best to get to as many comments and questions into the discussion as possible. If you would like to make a written comment or question, not out loud, you can type your comment into the chat box, also found at the lower right-hand side of the screen, and make sure you send that question to all participants so that everyone in the discussion can kind of see what your question is. We have this ESJ Action Plans Mastermind, Monica Palmera, on the line as our summarizer and chat monitor. So we'll be trying to weave as much content as we can from the chat box into the discussion. So even if we can't bring your comment into the chat will be saved and we'll have that feedback recorded. Lastly, if you'd like to submit your comments via email, if you'd like to further elaborate on anything that was said, or we'll try to get through everyone, but in case we don't get to you, you can email your thoughts to the ESJ Action Plan at cpuc.ca.gov, and that email will be found in the chat as well, so you can have it there. And lastly, before we start, this session is being recorded, so we can save all the feedback and comments. I think with that, we have our poll in. We've got 49 participants, so I think I'll hand it over to Steve for some opening framing.
And thank you. My name is Steve St. Marie. I work in the Water Division along with Jefferson, and we are happy to be here today. I would like to share a little bit of information with you to indicate the kind of work that we have been looking at in the kind of information we have been looking at in the Water Division having to do with the low-income water proceeding that is ongoing at the CPUC. And so I'm sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see that. Okay. I would like to this is not detailed information, but we'll do a quick snapshot. Recently, we have found that the most recent data that we have up to date is from November last year, and it seems as though the total number of customers of the Class A water utilities who are late on their bills is about 230,000 out of a little over 1.2 million customers in total. And my screen is, here we go. And we found that over a quarter of those customers, about 27% in November, were residential customers on the CAP programs, that is the customer assistance programs. That's a new name. Some of you may know those names, those programs as LIRA, the Low Income Rate Assistance Programs. They're similar to the CARE programs that the energy customers have. Looking very quickly, the average residential arrearage is up about 55% compared to the same period in 2019. It used to be about $135 on average among those who were behind on their bills. Now it's $208. We could discuss the subtlety of that, but basically among the people who are behind, $208 is probably a lot of money. The average non-residential arrearage is up, but not up by quite as much. Before last year, in September to November, it was about $640, and now it's up to about $717. One last graph here. Residential arrearages are now totaling about $43 million, and non-residential about $19 million. So we're talking over $60 million that is owed by customers and on the utilities books at this time. That's all that we need to do right now, and I will stop sharing. Okay. So one of the questions that we have been asked to address right from the beginning is what kinds of things does the Water Division do in order to try to help low-income disadvantaged communities, or ESJ in general? And I would like to begin by saying the Water Division regulates about 90 utility companies, most of which are small, and many of which serve in ESJ communities. Our work is to regulate them. We don't actually serve the water, of course, but we make sure that the utilities provide adequate service, and we work with other agencies to make sure that the water quality standards are met. We also have procedures for dealing with the utilities that are failing to meet the requirements that are necessary. Environmental and social justice is promoted and benefited by CPUC regulation in general. The CPUC sets rates according to costs, and costs are reviewed for reasonableness and prudence. We have a universal service policy, and it's unlikely that everyone would even be able to get water were it not for universal service rules that we help to enforce. Rates are set across whole service areas, and they are not segregated by area or in terms or conditions of where they are served. So people who are in town and people who are in the woods, if they are in the same service territory, they are paying the same rates, though one could argue that the people who are out in the less developed areas or the less congested areas perhaps are more costly to serve, and if we weren't dealing with regulation, perhaps would not be receiving service or would be receiving service at a different cost. The Class A water utilities have low income programs. We do not have those at this time for the very small water companies, the ones with fewer than 500 customers. We do some other things that help to facilitate ESJ, and that includes facilitating acquisitions and consolidations that may benefit the customers of small and undercapitalized water utilities. And we're participating in 2 proceedings that are ESJ related, and I'm speaking now about the one called the Low Income Water Utility, Low Income Water Proceeding, R17-06024. And that's the one that is enforcing such rules as the shutdown moratorium, and we're working on other policies that the Commission may be developing in future orders. And here we go. So, I mean, that's the story of the kind of stuff that we are doing generally. And of course, we're always looking to find if there are better ways that we can serve all the communities and especially the environmental and social justice communities.
Thanks, Steve. One last thing I would mention in the context of framing this discussion that we're about to have is something that has been mentioned a couple times in the last over the course of this workshop, the Affordability Proceedings R18-07006, where last year the Commission in Decision 20-07032 adopted a set of 3 metrics to measure affordability across all of its regulated industries, including water. And a staff report on affordability is due for release later this quarter. I mentioned it today so that later on we can continue discussing how it can best be applied to ESJ communities. Some of these metrics that the Commission has adopted look at things like CalEnviroScreen, rates, income levels, but the framework of how best to apply those metrics is still underway in the proceeding's second phase. So some of the kind of preliminary results that we're seeing is what you might expect. Some of these smaller communities that Steve has mentioned are kind of doubly burdened by both some of the highest water bills in the state as well as some of the lowest incomes, combined with the lack of assistance programs like the Class A's have. Affordability kind of affects customers from several different angles, so we are trying to measure it the same way. And so I think that is where we will leave off in the context of kind of framing the Water Division's role and water at the CPUC in the context of ESJ. And I think we'll open it up for discussion. Steve, do you want to introduce this first question that we have?
Well, sure. I'm not muted. Okay. What does it mean that California has legislated a human right to water? I actually have that that law as it was written available for us to look at. It is here. Okay, and essentially, just the very beginning, it is declared to be the established policy of the state that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water adequate for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. And the rest of this goes into what that is and what it means. Our question is, what does it mean to the CPUC, and how can we make sure that all people have access to safe, clean, and affordable water?
And Jeff and Steve, actually, maybe you could call on folks. Some folks have their hands raised. Just call on them, and then folks can unmute themselves, actually. So sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, at this point, one of the things I would really like to know is, how do I put the people in order that they have their hands raised? Oh, I see. So Edward Simon here. Edward, could you speak? And you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Edward Simon. I'm the Director of Business Performance and Supplier Diversity for California American Water, and just recently named the Chair of the California Water Association Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board. So certainly great to be with the team here this afternoon. And my question is, I understand that the Commission is engaging in some workforce development programs. And I think you formed an agreement with the State Workforce Investment Board. Can you share a little bit more information about that partnership and how maybe CWA can engage in these discussions, certainly to attract interest in people working, diverse people working in the water industry? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. This is Monica, Jeff, and Steve. I'll take this one real quick, and we should talk more offline. It would be really, really helpful. But just briefly, yes. So one of the goals of this action plan is to think about how we as the PUC can promote opportunities for workforce development, within our wherewithal, within our jurisdiction. So we obviously don't have a lot of expertise on that. So we entered into an MOU with the California Workforce Development Board to help us understand how we can use our jurisdiction and authority to promote opportunities. What we've been doing, we've just been getting started, so now is a good time to discuss. What we're doing right now is looking at three program areas: energy efficiency, vegetation management, and transportation electrification, three program areas that have some workforce development components. Understanding what we've done thus far from the PUC side, and kind of develop some best practices that we have already done, can share across commission, but then also think about how we can maximize our impact in that space. And we've been learning a lot through our partnership with the Workforce Development Board about, it's not just about training, it's about job placement, job quality, things like contractor standards. Those are the kinds of things we will be exploring as we further implement the MOU. So yeah, happy to talk more offline and engage on that, but that's generally where we are with that item.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I would tell you, I know from a CWA perspective, we certainly would be interested in engaging in those discussions. And I know you focused on you said the energy and vegetation management and so forth, but would be nice to add, if we can, working for a water utility in that focus area as well, because we certainly can use some assistance there. So I will definitely follow up with you after this. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Edward. At this time, we do not have any hands raised. I guess that means that maybe Jefferson should talk about our next question and see if we get some more excitement out of that one.
Sure. So the next thing, as I kind of hinted at a minute ago, is this affordability rulemaking entering its second phase, in which now we have these metrics. We are collecting a lot of data related to affordability. How do we use that to kind of best impact ESJ communities? And I know, a lot of these the proceeding itself has kind of garnered a lot of these discussions that will continue through the second phase. But in the context of ESJ, I think there's kind of a different angle we can look at. So are there any thoughts on that topic?
Okay, we have one raised hand, and that is Willis Hahn.
Hey, Steve. This is Willis Hahn. I'm an attorney with Nossman on behalf of CWA. And I did want to also tie this back to your first question about the human right to water and also the affordability metrics in the recent proceeding. And I wanted to tie it back through the stuff you opened up with on the consolidation of the small water systems. I know that the current ESJ action plan does mention the consolidation of water systems, but since that time, there's been a lot of activity in this area, not just the acquisition of other utility systems, water systems, but also not unregulated, but municipal systems as well throughout California, especially the Central Valley. So I guess the one thought I had is, what sort of steps can the commission take as part of this ESJ action plan to further the area of consolidations? Because in addition to the commission, you also have the State Water Board doing work in this area. They have the mandatory consolidation program, and in many instances, it's a lot of voluntary consolidations as well. So I think one thing that CWA would like to see in the ESG action plan is to expand on this area. How can we remove some of the barriers to seeing these consolidations go through? Because a lot of the time, not only do the dollars need to work out for it to make sense financially, but there's also other regulatory barriers or just process. The process just takes a long time. So I think what focus of CWA is to sort of streamline the consolidation process in a way that can reach out to these communities that are underserved, especially in the Los Angeles areas and in Central Valley, to make these consolidations happen, not only for an affordability program, but for water quality as well. And so that's just something I wanted to pose to all of you.
Okay, well, let me begin by saying we would be delighted to engage in a dialogue or hear what are the barriers from the point of view of an acquiring utility or from a utility system that wishes to be acquired. I'm sure that we don't appreciate how many barriers there are and how many hoops, proverbial hoops or metaphorical hoops, the parties must get involved in. The CPUC is mostly interested in costs and prices and who is going to bear the burden of paying in the process of a consolidation. And we are very careful to be sure that every consolidation that occurs or every acquisition that occurs is just and reasonable. But beyond that, we would like to know if there are barriers that we're not aware of or that we could somehow help to alleviate in order to make this process go better, go faster, and happen at less cost. And we certainly do try to have a very good relationship with the State Water Resources Control Board and work with them on acquisitions as well. I don't know if there are other people who wish to speak on this topic, but this is an area where people who are not in a good position to help themselves can be helped by the CPUC.
Yeah, just really quickly on that point, we appreciate that, the commission has recently taken action in the Water LIRA proceeding to, adopt a set of minimum data requirements for these acquisitions in an attempt to make the proceedings more streamlined and go faster. But I think, those were just adopted last August, so it remains to be seen whether or not those have any effect in these sort of proceedings. And so we just want to keep the dialogue open and think about other ways that we can have the commission proceedings for authorization to get acquisitions through. If there's anything we can do on that front.
So I see one hand raised in the chat, and I also saw Lauren James a hand raised a couple minutes ago. Lauren, if you'd like to speak first, and then the hand in the chat.
All right, thank you very much. Lauren James with Suburban Water Systems. I am the manager of communications and supplier diversity. It wasn't in relation to what Willis was speaking about, which is great, another great topic. I have a kind of an inward-looking question to kind of pose to the CPUC. And I know an important part of the ESG strategy is to ensure that the PUC regulators, the INT staff at the PUC, reflect the communities served by the utilities. And I'm just curious, how is the commission working to diversify their own workforce? I think that would be a key element in these discussions. So when we're talking about, you know, low income and communities and social justice, how many people are on this call from those communities that can shape this conversation and take us to the next level of actually getting something done, something equitable, something that we can roll out together. So I was just curious about how the commission is diversifying their own workforce right now.
Jeff and Steve, I can take that if y'all would like.
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah, because that kind of applies to some of our other goals. So yeah, so this environmental and social justice action plan is just one way that we're trying to think about diversity, equity, inclusion more broadly. So beyond this initiative, there are other initiatives at the PUC to get at exactly what you're mentioning. What sort of two different efforts that I will just name, there's more, but two main ones. One is sort of inward looking at ourselves as a commission and our staff. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion new task force that is really taking a lot of those hiring practices into account and other measures of inclusion into account, looking very much inward with us as staff. We also are engaging in a effort called C-Core, and it's Capital Collaborative on Racial Equity. It's we have a cohort of staff that are engaging in a year-long racial equity training. I am not personally part of the cohort, but I did participate in this cohort 2 years ago in a previous job, so I'm familiar with the curriculum at least a little bit. And they will be building a racial equity plan for us as a commission. So there's a lot of folks, it's a cross-commission group, much like our ESJ liaisons focusing on environmental justice. This group is working on racial equity, and we are trying to kind of sync our Venn diagram in terms of how we overlap on some of these issues. We want to be coordinated, but we don't want to say that this effort is necessarily speaking to racial equity or diversity in our staff. Those efforts are definitely doing that more closely, and we absolutely are looking to support those efforts. But those are two examples.
That's great to hear. And I would love to, follow up with us outside of this and to kind of hear about your progress and what we're doing to enhance this conversation as well. So that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Jeanette had her hand up. Jeanette Diaz.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeanette Diaz. I'm the manager of supplier diversity and special projects at San Gabriel Valley Water. I'm also the current chair of the CWA USDP committee. So our supplier diversity programs are successful at ensuring the regulated water utilities are spending on goods and services from diverse owned businesses. So just a thought, what can we do on a commission level or utility level to ensure that these businesses we're supporting are in turn supporting members of the ESJ communities?
I have to say, I've not followed that question before. Is that something that you can respond to, Monica?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not a water person, but I'm happy to. So unfortunately, we don't have. I mean, I'm sure you all know Stephanie Green, who manages our supplier diversity program. So unfortunately, I don't think we have her on the line in my news and outreach colleagues. So yes, but I think that's an important question that we should take to the supplier diversity team, and perhaps there could even be a follow-up more deliberately about that. Kind of similar to the workforce, we're kind of scratching the surface on some of this, but there are likely tangible action items we can take. I just, to be honest, I'm not clear right now on what they might be.
And it's just, to throw that out there and we can work together on that. and follow up. So yeah, that was just my comment and thought to throw out.
Yeah, and we can incorporate something like that into the plan, even just like putting that on our to-do list of like, we need to explore this, that works too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. Are there any comments on that topic from elsewhere in the chat, elsewhere in the call?
Hey, Jefferson, I don't know if you can hear me or not. Sorry.
Yes, we can.
I can't.
Go ahead.
It's Wes Owens with California American Water, and I unfortunately can't figure out how to raise my hand, which is my fault. I know Monica explained it on the morning sessions multiple times, so of course when I need to do it, I can't figure it out. So sorry about that. So I figured I'd just jump into the conversation if that's all right with you. And I know we're kind of like maybe jumping back and forth, but I was going to jump back again to the human right to water discussion. And then Steve, I think you teed up the question and then we kind of like went down a different path, but I just want to let you know, I wanted to talk about that, but I can wait and see if there was any more response to kind of what, okay. I think, and it's kind of, I know we've kind of beat on it in different proceedings and in different routes. When I say we, I mean the water industry, right? And it is this notion that Willis talked about of kind of streamlining these consolidation applications. And I understand, like, I'm going to try to keep in the context of ESJ here, and because not every consolidation is of an ESJ community, but a lot of them are, because that's a lot of the, like, Steve, it's a lot of the smaller utilities who have, are in potentially lower income communities or disadvantaged communities and have water quality issues in a lot of instances. And I know that we at CalAm have taken on or acquired several smaller utilities that have had water quality issues. I mean, one good example that kind of checks a lot of these boxes, Steve, is our acquisition of the Dunnigan system. So it's a small community, about 250 connections, a mobile home community right in the middle of the valley, about, half an hour north of Sacramento, single well, and, had chromium-6 issues, right? And chromium-6 issues that were exceeding the MCL that was in effect. It's not now, but we all think it ultimately will be again. And after CalAm acquired the system, we were able to install treatment there on their single well. So if treatment hadn't been installed, it would have, been a dire situation for them. And instead of having, X $100,000 treatment being paid for by 250 customers, we were able to spread it over our Sacramento district, so it was being covered by 60,000 customers, right? So instead of costing like $40 a month, it costs like 15 cents a month per customer, So I think that really hits especially on this goal 3, I'm looking at the ESJ plan right now, striving to improve access to high quality water, right? And, but unfortunately what we're kind of seeing is, sometimes these acquisition applications that are supposed to take around 260 days can take years. And I think Dunnigan wasn't years necessarily, but we've had other ones since then that have taken multiple years. So like Willis said, in the LIRA phase 1 rulemaking, there was a decision that, I think attempted to try to streamline it, but maybe even if we're just specific to disadvantaged communities, like ways of like trying to check certain boxes so that we can expedite acquisitions of these kind of disadvantaged communities more quickly. And the other thing, and maybe this is just me kind of being a little bit new to this arena, is a little more definition on what makes a disadvantaged community. So like after hearing about EnviroScreen tool yesterday and then this morning again, I pulled it up myself, and like, for example, I pulled up Dunnigan and it was in like the yellow zone, which was like 50 to 60%. And this is just 10 minutes spent trying to understand it. Like, I was like, so is that, it seems like that's bad, but not as bad as some of the other places. So maybe just some help and I pulled up the commission website about disadvantaged communities and read there, but maybe some more help from Water Division or other groups within the PUC trying to understand what makes it, what is the definition of disadvantaged community, which I think was a big part of the conversation yesterday around definitions, right? So maybe a little more clarity around that for us, water companies who aren't, I don't think, as involved as maybe some of the energy companies are in this field. So, and maybe that's just speaking for me. I know Ed is a lot more knowledgeable in this area than I am, but I think that input coming from the CPUC and maybe even the water division would be helpful.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Wes. Certainly yesterday morning was when we worked very hard on the definitions. And as you saw, there's multiple definitions and different definitions that are in legislation that we must follow, et cetera. But we are, and so we're not going to go through that again today, but we are interested in the water division in facilitating acquisitions to the extent that we're able to do so. And so that's now on the list, and we will definitely be having further discussion of that in the future. And I thank you for that comment. As for whether or not, maybe, on average, we would get tougher on acquisitions in the places where they do not involve facilitating greater environmental and societal justice. I don't think so. I think we're going to try to make sure that our processes work for everybody, but certainly in the ESJ communities, yes.
I did not say that, Steve. No, don't get tougher. I didn't say get tougher anywhere.
Well, does everything get better on average?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thanks for the time.
Yes, we have another hand up, but I don't know. It's Jacob S.E., I believe. Who is that?
Hi, Steve. It's Evan Jacobs here from California American Water, and I'm also the current board president of the California Water Association. And I actually had a little bit of a follow-up question to Wes's, just in terms of the different screens that are being used. And the one that I am the most familiar with and use in the context of the State Water Board is the Department of Water Resources runs its own screen for water. And it's not something you all have to answer now, but I would just be interested in knowing if the commission has preference or thoughts on the relative advantages and disadvantages of the DWR screen versus CalEnviro screen, which I think looks at more different non-related factors.
Yes, I'm unable to provide you with the CPUC's opinion about that, and honestly, I do not know the answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that? Are you familiar with that water board screen?
I'm not familiar with the DWR screen. I know, Wes, to your question, that the disadvantaged community definition in CalEnviro screen is based on the top 25% of CalEnviro screen scores. So taking into account kind of both pollutants and socioeconomic factors. But that's how that one is defined, just briefly. So I think maybe one thing I would like to bring up consolidation has been mentioned a couple of times. And one thing that I think is worth talking about in that context is maybe this tension between, acquisition of a water system in an ESJ community obviously has benefits such as, safer, more reliable service. There's obviously a tension between that and then the additional costs, which run the risk of burdening ESJ communities further. Does anyone else have thoughts about, how those two things interact, especially for, existing ratepayers who may not be, not necessarily of the acquired system? I know that's something Water Division is thinking about a lot during these acquisitions.
Is it, and sorry, I don't want to bogart the conversation here, but is it the burden? I guess there's two groups to look at, right? The burden's on, you say existing customers, but both utilities have existing customers, right? So is it like the existing customers for the acquiring utility or the existing customers for the acquired utilities, right? And I think the PUC looks at both of those. And I guess in the realm of this I mean, kind of what we see a lot is it's kind of easier to look at current rates of the acquired utilities because they're usually lower because they're usually not investing as much in their systems. And again, I'll keep beating on this drum, but when we're able to acquire and we make necessary investments, we could spread those over a larger customer base. So I think the commission needs to look at it from that perspective as well, not just like, all right, their rates are low right now, like, if they get acquired, and let's say they even get acquired by a nearby contiguous utility that has higher rates, well, and let's say we assume that they're going to conform those rates somehow, maybe not immediately, but sometime in the future, then that means their rates will be higher. But you also need to look at it from the perspective of, okay, if they also might have future capital spending needs that they've been deferring, that if they ultimately need to do that, which they will at some point, one way or the other, then those acquired companies' rates would go up probably above even almost likely above even the post-acquisition rate. So I think it's kind of like it's multifaceted, right? It's not just it's not a snapshot in time of here's what their rates are now, here's what the acquired company's rates are now. There's a lot of different moving parts,
You are absolutely right. There's a lot of issues involved, including that the people in the acquired community are being underserved, underinvested, and their rates are too low. And the local water utility has been either willing to apply at the CPUC or unwilling to go through the Prop 218 process of raising rates. These are serious problems, and society's preferences are not always clear as to what people want to do. A lot of people would like to be left alone, and even if I don't have the best water in the world, well, leave me alone. This is a problem, and and other people will say just the opposite. I've chosen to live here. Why can't I get good service like they get in town? These are issues that have to be adjudicated in every single case. I wonder if we should go on to another topic, or do we have any other hands up still? Jacob,
we have one
you
more
have your hand up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Evan Jacobs again, and I raised my hand again.
Evan, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, oh, no worries. One of the things that I think Manny Teodoro talked about at a commission proceeding a couple of years ago was the concept of affordability at both the individual level and the community level. And one of the things I think the PUC and the PUC regulated water utilities have really shown a lot of leadership in is providing affordability protection at the individual level, primarily through customer assistance programs, and certainly with the Affordability and LIRA program, we're looking at expanding and improving upon what already exists. But one of the things that I was very proud of, and it may be something to think about in future acquisition proceedings, particularly for those of disadvantaged communities, is California American Water acquired 3 systems in 2019 and 20 in disadvantaged communities: the Fruit Ridge system in the Sacramento region, the Hillview water systems in Madera County, and the Rio Plaza system in Ventura County, all of which were serving disadvantaged communities. And generally, we are not able to extend all of our customer assistance or conservation programs to newly acquired systems until after it has been considered through a full rate case process. And this year, with the encouragement of the Water Division and the commissioners, we actually filed for and were approved to extend our customer assistance program, our ratepayer assistance program, into each of those communities in 2020 during the height of, well, I guess it was the previous height of the COVID crisis. It seems like we're still in the middle of the COVID crisis. But I think that was a real success, and it was a step forward, bringing 7,000 customers many of whom really needed it, some relief on their water bills by extending that assistance. So I think that's one thing we can look at in the future, is how quickly we're able to extend those programs to newly acquired systems, particularly when circumstances are dire.
Hey Steve, it's John Tang with San Jose Water Company. I hope I can make a comment. Is that all right? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
I was muted there for a second. Go ahead, John.
Okay, thank you. I took note of your comment and the conversation between Wes and others about about consolidation, and I think from the public, from the investor-owned utility, from the regulated utility perspective, we want to be part of the solution. If it makes sense for the utility being acquired, and it makes sense for our customers as well. I think your comments brought to mind a situation in general. I think when these consolidations occur, not always, but I think in general, there's a flavor of underinvestments, as you said, a degradation of service, water quality issues. There are multiple stories of communities where they don't have a safe and reliable water. They cannot drink from the tap, and the papers have a field day with that in terms of saying, how can this happen in the 5th largest economy in the world here in California? And we know internally, we know how it can happen, right? Lack of rate base, lack of critical mass, lack of courage, maybe, as you mentioned, to go through the Prop 218 process to be able to make those adequate investments. And so I think when I hear that some of these utilities don't want to be approached, or don't want to have anything change, I'm just wondering, like, how can they have that kind of position when safe and reliable water service is kind of one of the underpinnings of of our society, so to speak. So just curious as to your comments on that.
Well, I don't have a lot more to say about it. I can relate to you the folklore that has come to me, and I was not in California in the 1920s and 1930s, and I wasn't even alive then. But part of the story that we hear is that some of the reasons that such small utilities exist is that when someone was developing a new town, the developer would go to the local agency that might be interested in supplying water, a state agency or a local town, a municipality, and say, won't you hook up our new area? We're going to be building 5,000, 10,000 homes. It's, a few feet that way. And the answer would be, gosh, that looks like a lot of investment. I'm not sure we really want to do that. We might have to raise rates to our existing customers who are very happy with us now. And then the developer would have to develop a water system on its own, as well as build the houses and infrastructure of the rest of the community. That's an indication that this is not a new problem. This is a problem that has been in existence for a long time. And it is only through the action of utilities, such as the Class A water utilities here, to be willing to take over such systems and rebuild them to modern standards, that these towns can be saved from going down into this process that you mentioned of degradation, underinvestment, rates that are too low that don't serve, and unfortunately being undersized compared to modern organizations that have to be larger. But this is what we're trying to do, is go forward from here and not go backwards and say, how did we get into this difficult situation in the first place? I wonder if we could go into questions about COVID and COVID relief, and how will the water systems of California be able to deal with the fact that there are many people who are not able to pay their bills, who aren't paying their bills, and that at some point we're going to have to dig out of that problem. And there are 0 raised hands.
Steve, I see one from Edward Simon.
Edward, thank you.
Hi, Steve, and I know Wes and Evan can jump in here as well. I know, and you probably know this, California American Water, we are not shutting off customers during this particular time. So you're right. For those that are not paying something toward the bill, there will be at some point a need for us to reconcile those lack of payments. But I know we would offer several payment options and terms. We certainly work with customers and will in this particular situation. But you're right, they're going to have to come to some point to say, you know what, I need to start paying something on this bill as I continue to utilize the service. But I know a lot of the other utilities are not shutting off and disconnecting service at this time as well. But would love to hear what other folks maybe are thinking or maybe doing with regards to that.
Thank you, Edward. My understanding is that utilities are not cutting off service, or utilities in general are not cutting off service due to non-payment at this time. Of course, there still may be customer shutoffs if there's a leak or if there's some other need to turn off the water. But customers are, I'm sure, thinking about this, and also the companies, and not just companies, but also state agencies and municipalities are suffering from the fact that they have large accounts receivables, or larger than they used to be, and will at some point have greater capital costs in order to keep those floating. Willis, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something quickly about the this point when we'll have to reconcile everything. And one point that we've had on our mind at CWA is that with the water utility sector specifically, we're kind of in a unique position, separate from the energy and telecom, because not only do we have these emergency customer protections by the CPUC, but there's also an executive order from the governor that prohibits shutoffs. And so, we're dealing with these kind of competing directives, and they don't always line up, because right now, there's the draft resolution M4849 that would extend the protections through the end of June. Whereas the executive order, there's no end date on it. It's there until it's lifted, and we're unclear when that will be. So I can't answer your question directly, but I just wanted to point out that, from the water utilities perspective, there's these different overlapping directives that we're trying to comply with all at the same time. So that sort of complicates the response, so to say.
It does. Okay, I've just gotten the word from Monica that we should turn to a summary and closure of this meeting. I want to thank everyone for their comments. This has been a very interesting set of comments, and Lord knows we've got a long way to go to make California into the paradise that we hope it will be.
So I can give a quick recap. We're trying to just recap at the end of all the sessions kind of the main themes, and in this conversation, it definitely was, there's definitely some supplier diversity and workforce development, potential opportunities in the water space that we haven't really discussed or pursued. So there's probably some angles there to talk about, and continuing to partner with our other colleagues on promoting racial equity and diversity of our workforce, such that the people that we're trying to lift up in these conversations actually work at the PUC, and that we represent California. Definitely heard that loud and clear. Obviously the conversation talked quite a bit about consolidation and what the opportunity is to create efficiencies and streamlining in the consolidation process, such that it benefits disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities. And I mean, I think I will speak as a person that's relatively new to water. I know water is its own very important space, and I wouldn't say I'm any kind of expert, but understanding what some of these dynamics are in communities that might want to stay in their small water utility, or where there might be opportunities to get into a bigger utility where the costs can be shared and burdens can be lifted, and thinking about, are there ways that we need to approach that from an environmental and social justice perspective for specific communities potentially, but generally the consolidation process altogether and how that might facilitate better service and quality for environmental justice communities. Also heard a little bit about, we talked about affordability a little bit and some of the tools to analyze, disadvantaged communities and impacts, and maybe thinking about how Water Division can continue to educate utilities and stakeholders on what's available there, so that it can inform all of our work. There may be some opportunities there. But Steve and Jeff, anything else that, could potentially be added to our to-do list, or did I kind of get that?
I think you've pretty much got it. I would say that the two proceedings that are underway that involve the Water Division, both the affordability proceeding and the low income water proceeding, will have their own actions. And of course, this is not a meeting to discuss those proceedings. It's just come up as being an area where we are going forward. So there will be additional actions that will be taken by the CPUC in the months to come. And this has been an interesting discussion. I wish we could go on further, but I'm sort of glad that I get to go offline for a little while now.
Thanks everyone for your time and feedback. It'll all be considered in the update to the ESJ action plan, and the Commission's intending to release a draft of the plan later this spring, and that'll allow for additional public comment at that time. So in the meantime, if there are any other topics that didn't get discussed, feel free to submit those thoughts and comments to the ESJ action plan email that was dropped in the chat at the beginning. And Monica, unless you have any other anything else to focus on, then I think we're come
back for the 2 p.m. session. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.